Okay, everyone, let's move on from last class. Last class we started to discuss the pre-Messianic era. The Gemara gives a statement, and we're going to go to Mishnah today. Actually, I just mentioned this Mishnah to a good friend of mine. He told me something, and I said, look in the Mishnah, I'll tell you the details. We'll look at that Mishnah today, and some Gemarot as well. So the expression the Gemara gives to describe the pre-Messianic era is Chevlei HaMashiach. Chevlei HaMashiach. This is usually translated as, anybody know? The birth pangs or the birth pains of Mashiach. That's how they translate it. What does it mean, the birth pains of Mashiach? What does that metaphor teach? There's a few metaphors. We're going to look at two today. And then we're going to actually try to figure out what these pains will be and potentially how bad they are. Well, the metaphor of birth is painful. Yeah? And what's also interesting about it is that it doesn't happen overnight. Right? There's early pregnancy, there's late pregnancy, then you get to the contractions, and then the most challenging and difficult pain comes at the end. The most painful is right before, nachon, right before the birth. The pain is at its most intense, and then you go from the pain, hazorim bedima barina yiktsaru, those who sow with tears, then comes the birth. So this metaphor is not just like it's going to be bad, but there's a quick switch from tremendous pain to great joy. I don't see anywhere else where you have these two aspects put together so much, of pain and potential destruction and darkness, until you have absolute joy in one moment. And the joy that comes with childbirth is only there because there was pain beforehand. The two are connected. So this is one of the mishalim, one of the metaphors used by Chazal to teach us that right before Mashiach comes, there's going to be a very dark, difficult, challenging time that is going to be in the world, and especially for our people. Okay? So much so, we're going to see Gemarot, where there are various rabbis who say, I want Mashiach to come, but I don't want to be alive before he gets here, because the times before Mashiach come are going to be extremely difficult, extremely painful, and challenging. That's one metaphor, Chevlei HaMashiach. So if you hear that expression, that's what it means. That's what we're referring to. The birth pains, meaning the contractions that will lead to the ultimate child, in this case, Mashiach. The Vilna Gaon gives another metaphor based upon the prophets on page 70. And he says that redemption, Geula, is boker, is daytime. B'shem boker. However, Galut is nighttime, is Laila. So the redemption is like a morning. It's an awakening. It's a new birth. It's a beginning. And he mentions a couple of the prophets, right? Oh, I'm sorry, this is not that one. This is the birth one. I'm so sorry. The nighttime when he mentions elsewhere. It says, just as Sion has given birth, it means that intense darkness comes immediately before the day. And a woman is in the greatest pain right before the actual birth. So daytime and nighttime, Yom and V'layla, Boker and Laila. And just like There has to be a period of darkness before you can appreciate the light of the morning. There has to be pain in order to bring the child forth. So too, before Mashiach comes, there's going to be a darkness of birth pains right before Mashiach's arrival. Okay? That's what they mean by Chevlei HaMashiach. But what is it? What exactly is this? So let's look at a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Sota. And it's unusual, but the Mishnah is going to give us a list of a number of things that are going to happen to society before Mashiach comes. To society before Mashiach comes. Well, let's start with another expression that Chazal used to describe right before Mashiach comes. We saw pains of birth to birth itself. We saw darkness to light. Now we see something called Ikvasei de Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach. Okay? The Ikvot HaMashiach. What does that refer to? So on a simple level, it just means right before Mashiach comes. Right? You're hearing the footsteps of Mashiach. So the Mishnah is going to tell us there are certain things that are going to occur, and none of them are really that great. We'll give you the list. That's going to occur right before Mashiach comes. Okay? Now, this is not a coincidence, and it's not a prediction. It's explaining. So this Mishnah is possibly telling us what the birth pains of Mashiach actually are. What does that mean we'll be in pain? What is this pain all about? Says the Mishnah, first of all, here's your checklist if you know Mashiach is close. Number one, chutzpah yisager. There's going to be an increase in chutzpah. What's chutzpah?
Attitude?
Negative insolence and attitude, yeah. Right? We're going to see increase in that. The Yoke Yamir, we're going to see that the vine is going to yield its fruit, but wine is going to be expensive. Okay, we'll come back to that. Malchut Tapach Leminas, the government, those people who control society, and we're going to see why all these ideas are very, very prevalent, and if you ask me, happening today, is going to turn to heresy. The people who run the government. Now, which government are we talking about? Well, it doesn't specify, but since the rest of the Mishnah is going to refer mostly to Eretz Yisrael, we can assume that it's the government that leads the land of Israel, but not necessarily. It could be other governments too, because they're reflective of each other. Is going to turn to heresy. They're going to be non-believers running the land of Israel right before Mashiach comes. Ve'ein tochachot, and no one, now I remember. And no one is going to give them reproof. They're going to do whatever they want to do, and no one's going to tell them off, and they're just going to run society and run Israel in many ways that go against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beit Vad Yeluznut, the meeting place of scholars, where great scholars go to study. It doesn't just say Torah scholars, it could be non-Torah scholars, will be used for immorality. There's going to be a lot of znut, is sexual immorality specifically, not just immoral actions, but sexual immorality is going to exist right through society. Okay. Vahagalil. Now we're going to start to talk about parts of Israel. Vahagalil Yecharev. The north of Israel is going to be destroyed. The north of Israel is going to be destroyed. There's going to be destruction and war happening from the north. Supposedly, nations from the north of Israel, Lebanon in this case, is going to cause pain and challenge to to the Jewish people who live in the Galil. V'hagavlan, now there's a dispute what the Gavlan is referring to. One opinion is it refers to the other borders of Israel. That's usually how the most understand it. What about those other borders? They're going to be Yoshum, desolate. The other borders, when are borders in trouble? When people are coming in and seeping through the border to bring trouble. So some take this as a prediction that the Mishnah is telling us of the border of Israel are going to be under attack, which they have been. And some say it's actually a reference to scholars are going to be desolate. People who are great scholars will be desolate and empty. No real great scholarship is going to exist before Mashiach comes. The Anshe Hagavul, and the people who live on the borders, Yisovu Me'ir Le'ir, are going to have to travel from city to city. They're not going to feel safe on the borders of Israel. They're going to have to go from city to city, V'lo yichanenu, and no one's going to take any pity on them. They can look at them and say, you live on the border, serves you right. Or you live on the border of Gaza, what are you doing down there? You should be somewhere else in Israel. Who are you to live over there, over the green line or wherever it is? You know, when I was, when they removed the Jews from Gaza, remember that whole episode, Gush Katif, remember the whole thing? Remember that happening? Yeah. So I was in Israel before, during, and after that was going on. I was leading trips there, and we stayed in hotels with groups. They take groups of young professionals and people to stay in hotels around Israel. And for a long time afterwards, people who were living there, who had their homes and built their lives there because they were told they should and could, and were kicked out. By the way, the only time in world history that I know of where people were kicked off their own land, where people were kicked out by their own people from their own land, reminds me of this, and people didn't take pity on there, whatever, and they had to live in hotels, and it was a very, very difficult, terrible time for the Jewish people, right, who were living on the borders of Israel, which still is today. When bombs come in from Gaza, right, central Israel is also getting it now, but the borders are the ones who really start to fear. The Mishnah continues. Not only that, v'chokhmot sofrim tisrach, the wisdom of learned people is going to degenerate. People who used to have great wisdom, that's going to go. The yirei chet, and people who fear sin, people who believe in God, who don't want to do aveirot. If they act that way, it used to be that, you were a God believer and you were respected. Now you're going to be despised. People are going to hate you for fearing sin and doing mitzvot. V'ha'emet teheh ne'ederet. And truth will be lacking. Actually, ne'ederet really means will be little pockets. It's going to be a lot of sheker in the world. It's going to be an alma sheker, a world of a lot of falsehood. There'll be small little groups that have emet. And neder is going to be hidden away. It's going to be very hard to discern what's true and what isn't true. Now the Mishnah starts to talk about the family unit and the breakdown of the family. So we talk about sexual immorality, how the places where people learn are going to be sexual immorality, and people are going to be wise, people are going to be stupid. Na'arim.
Isn't like a mother-in-law relationship or something?
Na'arim penei zakeinim leveinu. And we know that young people, youths, are going to put old people to shame. It used to be that there was a lot of kavod the young people would have towards their parents and grandparents and old people in society. Olam hafuch. Now the old people are going to have to start having respect for young people. Zakeinim yamdu b'nei ketanim. And old people are going to stand for young people. As opposed to what normally happens, young people show respect for old people. Suddenly young people are going to be controlling society. And the old people are going to have to give them respect. Ben Mnuval Av. A son is going to revile his father. there's going to be this disgust that children are going to have against their parents. Wow. Used to be children used to respect their parents, love their parents, No, that's gone. But, come ba'ama, a daughter is going to stand and rise against her mother and show a lack of respect for her. Kala, a daughter-in-law, bachamata, is going to go against her mother-in-law. I have no idea what this means. I'm just telling you what it says. I can't even imagine a situation where a daughter-in-law would speak against her mother-in-law. Besides every single marriage counseling session that I now do, we'll leave those aside, shall we? Daughter-in-laws are going against their mother-in-laws. Oive ish anshe beito. A man's enemies will be members of his own house. There's going to be a breakdown and there's going to be fights. And he thought the enemy came from outside of the family. The whole family unit is going to be, maybe this is a prediction of even the divorce culture that is going to exist before Mashiach comes. And then it says something really, really weird, which doesn't seem to fit in with the rest of the Mishnah. Pnei Hador, this one I have to write down. This is going to take some analysis. And once again, this is not good stuff, but it's chevli, it's necessary for the arrival of the Mashiach. Pnei Hador, ke pnei hakelev. The face of the generation, ke pnei hakelev. The face of the generation has the face of a dog. Where did that come from? You tell me about society, you tell me about governments, families, and suddenly you're like, the face of the generation has the face of a dog. What is that? What is that an expression of? What a strange thing. First of all, it's strange in and of itself. And then it doesn't seem to fit in with the rest of the Mishnah, but we know it must because right afterwards it carries on the same topic. Son is not going to be embarrassed of his father. There's going to be a busha, right? A lack of shame of the way people act. Now here's the punchline. Who can we rely upon? You can only rely upon Hashem. Well, why? Because don't rely on the government. We know what they're up to. Don't rely on your parents, right? Because you have no shame in front of them anyway. Don't rely on society. Don't rely on... It's all gone. So what's that going to lead to? One thing and one thing only. The arrival of Mashiach to help fix up this one big mess that has been created. Okay? So let's talk about this expression over here, because everything we need to know is inside this expression. Pnei Hador, Pnei HaKelev. Let's have a look at 3 or 4 interpretations that Chazal give this statement. What does that mean, the face of the generation has the face of a dog? Anyone like to guess? Yeah, Ilana?
I don't know if this relates, but I once heard an idea that like people in this generation will save their dogs before other people.
I haven't seen that inside as such, but I've heard it from a number of places. Actually, I went to a shiur of Tzipora Heller many years ago. She spoke about it. She said that we're going to live in a generation, our generation, where people prefer their dogs to their own family members. You ever experienced that? You're like, someone will like curse out their father, but my dog still loves me. By the way, it's not a coincidence. Kelev, we said, is kol lev, all heart. Right? They're loyal creatures. It's a sign there's going to be a lack of loyalty. There's going to be a lack of loyalty, that people are going to feel a connection to their kelev, because that's the only creature that's going to give them any true love, friendship, and loyalty. Because their families have betrayed them, and their governments betrayed them, and everywhere you put faith rather than Hashem, you've betrayed. So all you're left with is your dog. And that's why we live in a generation today that everyone loves their dogs more than their own families. Right? You can insult their parents, just don't insult their dogs, they'll kill you. So lack of loyalty. Another is, actually, Rashi says this, is dogs are, actually Rashi says something fascinating. People will look like their dogs. Now, that may not be literal, although sometimes, you ever see walk down the street, someone walking their dog, you look down at the dog, look at the person, look at the dog, right? Same floppy ears, same wet nose, right? Same hair, you're like, wow, it's unbelievable. It's uncanny. You've experienced that before. It's not a good thing. You don't look like your dog. So he goes on further and says, or, and it may be related, people will act like their dogs in public. How do dogs act in public?
No shame.
No shame. They will do all of their business, whether it's going to the bathroom, having relations, all in public. We're going to live in a society where everything is public, there's no shame, and everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to see what you're eating, and everyone's going to see what you're doing, and who you're doing it with, and what you're doing. Right? It's all going to be out there. Pnei Ador, Pnei Kelev. Everyone's going to have the face of a dog. There's going to be no shame. Others say, actually, it's a sign of hypocrisy. We're going to live in a very Hippocratic society. Because what are dogs like? It's like when a dog sees you, he's happy to see you. He's always smiling, right? Other creatures don't. You can always see a dog's happy, right? Waving his tail and bugging out. But what's going on inside? Maybe he hates you. So we're going to be surrounded by people in society who on the outside seem very nice. Sound familiar? On the outside, it's all love and kisses and moi, right? Outside, it's all friendly, like a dog. But on the inside, right, they hate you. Or they speak against you or act against you. A very hypocritical, untrue, inauthentic generation, where it seems like everything's good, but it's just the face of a dog. Everything's perfect, face of a dog, just smiling. What's happening behind the scenes? What's happening inside? So far, so bad. The fourth one is probably the most famous, and this is actually written by Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zech Tzadik Lavracha. There's a thin book I was given in yeshiva, like 30 years ago. It's called Pains of Mashiach. Now, I didn't read it because I wasn't really interested. It's called The Footsteps of Mashiach. And he wrote this, before he died, he wrote this book about, right before the Holocaust, about, it was called by the Nazis, about what society is going to be like before Mashiach comes. Okay? So he has a little book called The Footsteps of Mashiach, this expression from the Mishnah, Pains of Mashiach. And he says, this expression, Pnei Ador Pnei Kelev, is actually referring to something quite specific. First, we have to figure out who is the Pnei Hador. Who is the face of the generation? Who is that referring to? Who is that referring to? The face of the generation. Because whoever they are, they're the ones who have a face of a dog. What's the face of the generation they're referring to? Who said that? Yeah, the leaders. Why the leaders? The face of the generation. Who do you see? Who do we see the face of in public? Right? The news is the leaders. So it's actually a reference to not just the government, but the leaders in general. And by the way, it doesn't just have to be the political leaders. It could all be the social leaders, right, that we all look up to. These leaders, but he actually refers to it as government. He's the Bnei Ador, are the people who run society, right? In our case, the elected officials that we elect. They're going to have the face of a dog. What does that mean? Have a face of a pug or a chihuahua? What does it even mean? So he gives the following very famous analogy. He says, imagine walking down the street and you see someone walking their dog. Yeah? Who walks in front?
Dog.
The dog. Dog's always in front, leading the way. Now, if you were to see that scene, what would you think? You would think that the dog is the master, and the master is subordinate to the dog. That's the way you would think of it, yeah? The dog's the master, and we're going to follow this. But when do you actually figure out that the dog is not in charge? Well, imagine the person's walking with the dog in front of them. The person makes a left turn. What does the dog do? Turns his face and then follows the master. At that point, you know who's really in charge. He says the same thing. Before Mashiach comes, we're not going to have real leadership. So it fits in with the rest of the Mishnah. We're not going to have real leadership. There are people who are going to be in charge of government, of institutions, of synagogues, who look like they're leading, but they have a face of a dog. They're not. They're just following the whims and desires of the people they're leading. And so when these people will make a left turn and say, we want to do this, the leaders aren't going to be real leaders and say, oh, you're right. They're going to be like, we're with you. We are leadership, we're taking your lead. Bnei Ador, lack of real conviction and powerful leadership. Everyone's going to just succumb. Maybe it's a prediction to democracy, I don't know. Which happens to be a good form of government for now, but it's a lack of leadership. Because whatever the people say, the leaders do. They're the face of the dog of the generation. Yeah? Now that's Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman who wrote that interpretation. Yeah. So those are 4 possible answers to Bnei Ador, Bnei HaKelev. Very hypocritical, lack of loyalty, right? We're going to have to go to a dog for any form of authentic. People will look like their dogs, or worse, they'll act like dogs and do everything in public. There's no shame, no more busha, which is why the next part of the Mishnah says, oh, and sons will have no shame for their fathers. Not even the family. It's not just a society thing. Even in the home, there is no busha. Yeah.
What was the fourth reason you said?
That's Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman.
What previous? Please now confused with which one was.
Okay, so Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, he said that the face of the generation, or the leaders of the generation, when they see someone, when they see their people they're leading turn, they just follow them. They have no real convictions. They have no real morals or ethics or principles. Whatever the people want, they give them. You think they're leading, but they're not. The people are really leading them. If they say, we want to do this, if they say, we believe this is the right thing, the leaders won't say, no, that's not the way things have done. That's not the way we should be doing things. They're going to go again. They're going to basically just give in, right? Like the face of a dog. Yeah? Interesting stuff. The breakdown of society and the family unit. This is going to lead a vacuum in society. That Mashiach, it's going to lead to us realizing we can only have faith in Hashem, and then Mashiach comes. Yeah.
So it's only talking about government leaders?
That's the way he understood it. But, you can understand it more today. We're seeing about it today of social leaders, economic leaders.
What about the rabbis who generally?
Oh, the rabbis already got at the beginning of the Mishnah. Right? That is the Beit Vadazut. We're going to see a lot of immorality and a lack of wisdom in our leaders. And a lack of wisdom. And only a little bit of truth here or there. It's going to be very, very hard to discern who has the truth and who doesn't have the truth. Says the Gemara, this Mishnah which we saw, right, is indicative of another Gemara. The Gemara tells us that in the generation, right, Amar Rav Yochanan, David, Dor Sheben David Ba, the generation that Mashiach arrives in, Talmidei Chachamim, Mitmatim, is going to be very few Torah scholars. It's interesting because there's a lot more Torah being studied today than there has been in years. But real great Torah scholars will be few and far between. Very, very few. Bashar, Einem Kalot, and they'll be few in number. And as for the rest, their eyes are going to fail through sorrow and grief. They're very difficult. Now, this Mishnah, by the way, isn't what I thought it would be. I thought it would be like wars and Gog and Magog. But it seems to be that the pains of Mashiach is not physical wars, not according to this Mishnah. It's societal anguish. Breakdown of the families, daughters going against their mother, just a full breakdown, okay? And many, many harsh decrees will come against, and all of this will follow one after the other, says the Gemara, and can be extremely difficult for our people. That will lead us to turn to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Rav Dessler, we spoke about before, he says, well, he tries to understand this. Why would this be? Why is Hashem setting up the system this way before Mashiach comes? And he actually understands this in maybe a nicer way. He says, this breakdown of society is actually a good thing. It's actually a good thing. It's like a vaccine, right? Incredible that he's giving this analogy, right? I just got my booster shot yesterday, and boy, is my arm sore. Yeah, he says, there's something good that comes from this happening. All these terrible things of parents and children. By the way, I must mention something. Rabbi Ari Kaplan, by the way, a lot of what we're describing over here, this entire course, comes from a great rabbi called Rabbi Ari Kaplan. I don't know if you heard of him. He was a great Torah scholar who wrote a lot about Mashiach and the days before Mashiach. He had a vast amount of knowledge. He talks about this breakdown, and he says the gap between children and parent and the breakdown is actually related to the speeding up of society. You see, society is speeding up with inventions. So much so that it used to be that, a grandfather and a grandson had a lot in common. He had a wheel and was hoping not to die of septicemia, and he had a wheel and hoped not to die of septicemia. It was the same thing, right? He says, but that's different. Since technology is going to have to speed up, we'll see why possibly later, because a lot of the illnesses that exist in the world are going to disappear. Since that's going to occur, the distance between parents and children is going to be vast. They're going to be able to relate to each other because society is speeding up so much, building up, just like Erev Shabbat, which is what we're in right now. We're going into Shabbat, so it's Erev Shabbat, everything's running. So there's a lot of speed, a lot of things are happening very, very quickly, and technology is turning around. Like in 100 years, we went from inventing an aeroplane to conquering space. In 100 years, you just, you basically gave birth to another horse, right? And now we're like, unbelievable, visiting other planets, potentially, which will happen. Okay, so all of this is speed up. This speed up is actually disconnecting generations. So that's how Ari Kaplan understands this Mishnah. Rav Dessler describes it like a vaccine. How does a vaccine usually work? It's an inoculation. They give you a little bit of the disease. When you have a little bit of the disease, what happens? Your body fights against it when you do actually get the disease. Nachon? Right? You build up antibodies. That's what Dessler writing after the Second World War. Little do you know, the vaccine mashal would really become very, very well known. He says, Yadur Barofe. He goes, it's known in the world of medicine that they give la'adam bari, they give a healthy person zurikot, injections, shots. L'shem chesun is a form of inoculation. Hainu, what is that? What are they giving? Shezorkim ladam, they put inside, right, the body, charma me'en machla, a little bit of the disease itself. That's how it works, yeah? So you build up antibodies so you can fight off the real disease. So they give you some of the bad, and you get to taste it, and it's not pleasant, and it's painful, but it's going to prevent you from succumbing to the major. He says it's true in spiritual matters as well. Unbelievable. Look at this amazing piece. Sometimes it's necessary to inject ourselves with a state of extreme materialism. Wow. Even at a time when the good inclination is not under attack, right, from the evil inclination, in order to arouse the Yetzer Tov, to be able to fight off the Yetzer Hara. So he says it works physically in the body, but it's going to happen in society, and it happens to us individually. Hashem will give us certain challenges so that when the real threat comes, we're ready to fight it off. We're being inoculated. We're taking in this disease of extreme materialism, which will be right before Mashiach comes, okay? So that we can fight off the evil inclination when the need arises. Because that's the reason Adam Rishon was sent into a world of physicality in the first place. It's also the reason he says, behind the test, V'zeh gam tam le'nisyonot ikvasad Mashiach, of the days before Mashiach comes, the footsteps of Mashiach. Bless you.
Yeah.
Ki hit urut hamilchama, because the arousal, the awakening to fight physicality, the material world, will itself end up becoming the spiritual catalyst to the arrival of Mashiach. So he's saying this Mishnah is describing terrible things, but all of that actually is that it's horrible and painful, but even that's for the good. Gamzul Tova, that's also part of Hashem's plan to prepare us for the arrival of Mashiach. So the lack of spirituality, and but we're going to see, the Rambam is going to learn from Daniel, the prophet, that we're going to see a wave of atheism spread through the world before Mashiach comes. We're going to see this wave of atheism. That's part of breaking down right through the world. Not just the Jews, the entire world is going to move away. It used to be that everyone believed in God. That was a given. Everyone connected to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. They knew it was a higher power. Okay, you had your God, we had our God. But there was something there now. It's like you say you're a God believer. Right? Remember the Mishnah says? You must, they hate you. He says all of that, even that is from years of Galut, but he says also to open up the door to the true Mashiach coming and revealing the truth. There's like a breakdown of all spirituality in this world. Except there'll be emet, and there are little pockets of truth that you'll be able to hold on to. Little small pockets. And he carries on. Another reason for these Chevlei HaMashiach, Otam, ki ifshar lilmod divrei chiyuvei meklirot hefech. It's impossible to appreciate the positive without seeing the bad. You only appreciate the light when you have darkness. You only appreciate birth. Right? If you just woke up and there's a baby lying next to you, you don't appreciate it. Only when you've gone through blood, sweat, and tears to create life, you're like, oh, now I appreciate what's happened over here. So what does it actually do? It actually increases the joy. Right? You enjoy seeing the light. You enjoy because you went through the difficulty. So we're going to enjoy Mashiach's arrival, he's saying, and enjoy the great spirituality of that time by virtue of the fact that we went through this difficult, dark, and challenging time. Okay? And he quotes the final prophecy of the final prophet, Malachi, you shall return and you shall see the difference between the righteous and the wicked. There's going to be a lot of bad people. Remember the separation of society we spoke about? We're going to have very, very righteous and very, very wicked. It's going to be a time of kitzoni. Everything is extreme. It used to be everyone's kind of like the same. Now we're going to see a lot of schmutz. And some great people as well. Okay? That's very indicative of the end of days. A person will never learn how spiritual he is until he understands how physical he can be. For this reason, we need the pre-Messianic era and all of its choshech and all of its darkness. Wild stuff, right? Wild stuff. Let's quote the Gemara we mentioned before so you can sit inside. So when someone says to you, who told you that, you don't say Rabbi Hadjioff, because they don't know who I am. Say it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Amma Ula. Ula said, Yete, let Mashiach come. V'lo achimina, but I don't want to see him. What? Ula? Gemara, Ula don't want to see Mashiach? He doesn't mean Mashiach. He means all the trials and tribulations and the breakdown before Mashiach comes. And Rabbah also says, Yete v'achimina. Says, I don't want to see him either. Rav Yosei said, Yete, I disagree. Let him come. V'azke de'etziv betula dokufta v'chamra. And may I be worthy of sitting in the shadow of his donkey's saddle. I wish I could be alive just to catch a glimpse of his arrival. So you have two very contrasting opinions. Some say, don't want to be alive when he comes. Another opinion is, I wish I could just catch a glimpse of him. Even his shadow off his donkey's saddle. So Abaye asked Rabbah, who said he didn't want to come, and says, why don't you want to see him coming? What's your problem? Right? My Tama. And he goes, is it because of the birth pangs of Mashiach? This is this very interesting Gemara. It can be very informative for other reasons. He says, but don't be scared of these birth pangs. Don't be scared of them. Because we know, Abai said to Rabbah, that it's being taught, Rabbi Elazar taught us, what can a person do to be spared the Chevle HaMashiach? So there's things you could do to prevent being victim to all these birth pains. Let him engage in Torah and Gimulut Chasadim. Right? And he says, and you, Rabbah, you do both. You're a fantastic Torah scholar, and you do a lot of Chesed. Interesting why those two things were picked out, right? Learning Torah and Gimulut Chasadim. Fascinating. All things to say. He didn't say you moved to Israel. He's like, we have a tradition, says the Gemara, that if you want to be spared this final Bein Adam Lachaveru Mitzvot. Now we're going to talk about Bein Lachaveru Mitzvot a lot more. It's going to be the antidote to everything before Mashiach comes. The generation before Mashiach comes, our avodah is to learn Torah, because you have no Torah, you don't know what you're doing, but you're going to have to practice it between people. Now remember, everything we saw in the Mishnah was a breakdown of society, breakdown of family relationships, of friendships, of teachers, breakdown, immorality in places, and poor Laleni, we see it every day in the news. You hear crazy stories of what's happening in schools and horrible stories and great. It breaks you up. You have to have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it's not good, but eventually it's all for the good. So that's what he said to him, right? And he said, well, I hear, true, I do have both of those things, Rabbah said, but I'm still don't want to be alive when he comes. I don't want to be involved in this Chevle Mashiach, because maybe I'll do a lot of Aveirot, and the merit I get from these other things are not going to be able to combat it. And that's how the Gemara ends. So he defends his position and says, no, I hear what you're saying, and what you're saying is true. He doesn't disagree with the statement. It's true. Torah and Gemilut Chasadim can be the solution to all these problems, and is the solution to all these problems, right? But I don't rely upon that, because maybe I do too many Aveirot and I'm still nervous. It's not going to stand instead for me. Yeah. Thoughts, comments, questions? Can anyone see 2021 and all this? Spooky, right? Yeah. I have to say, taking it all in? Yeah, right.
Is he saying that he doesn't agree with Torah and doing Chesed, or is he saying that
he's
is
like,
worried
me
about his own
personally,
scale?
he was nervous that it wouldn't be enough, because maybe too many Aveirot, and it will counteract any Torah and any Gimel Chasadim that he does. So he's not disagreeing with the statement. He agrees that Torah and Gimel Chasadim is going to be the solution. And we're going to see that Bein Adam Lachaveru Mitzvot, right, is what's going to build the Beit HaMikdash and bring Mashiach, right? So he's not disagreeing with it. He just didn't feel as though, in his humility, he may have been wrong, right? That he would have that, that merit. Hmm?
So are we more worthy than them?
So it's not worthy. When we spoke last class, that there's a cumulative effect. We're not. Is Yerida Tadorut.
Right,
You
but
read
they're
the Torah.
saying they were so great, and they're saying we don't want to live in this generation.
They want to see, they don't want to see Mashiach coming because of the pain that's going to occur before Mashiach comes,
And the sins that he's
and that he may be doing,
So if
right?
we're
Because
here,
of what's available in society. Yeah.
so that does make us worthy. Because if someone so great is saying that, and we're living in this right now,
Yeah. So what are you saying?
and you're still doing there's also less expected from us.
There is less expected of us, right?
That's
Which is
part
not a
of
great thing.
Yeah.
I expect less from my 2-year-old than I do from my 20-year-old. Right? But it's still not good. You don't want to be a 2-year-old. You want to be, yeah. So Chevel Mashiach, Chevel Mashiach, according to this, is, so the story's coming out of supposedly great people doing terrible, terrible things. I don't know if you hear this stuff. We shouldn't speak about these things because it's upsetting. But it's part of this. It's this, Hashem is allowing it to happen as a form of inoculation. That we despair, don't put our faith into people, put our faith in God and God only. En la Lashem, ela aviv shebashamayim. Yeah.
Did you say that's like selfish?
What aspect?
Like not wanting to be affected by the time of Mashiach.
Why is it selfish? No one wants to be tested. We say every day, Lord Son, but Lord Zion. I don't want to be tested because I might fail. Right? That's not selfish. It's like, I don't want to go through this. We don't opt for physical challenges. You shouldn't. Right? We say, Lord Son, I don't want to be tested at all. I'd rather not. I agree, I don't want to be tested. I keep failing every time I am. Yes.
Didn't you say that we're able to bring Mashiach earlier if we do certain things?
Oh, yeah.
So like, wouldn't it be that like we're
We have the ability to expedite, which we want. We want to bring Mashiach earlier, because once Mashiach comes, this is done. This is the pre-Messianic.
But like, how could it be that like we're becoming greater and doing more mitzvot and learning more Torah, and then like this is happening at the same time?
I'm done answering your question. Who's doing more mitzvah?
Like, if we could bring Mashiach faster, doesn't that mean that like the Jewish people are becoming better? Times are are better. For
Well,
Jewish
there's
people?
2 ways to do it. We said the Mashiach will come in a generation that's kol chayav kol zakai, right? Really, really bad, really, really good. It's a time of extremes before Mashiach comes. Very extreme, tumultuous times. And yet we can do certain things that can merit. Those things don't have to be so great. When we saw the Chavetz Chaim or Rav Desla, it can be something small, right? Not much is expected of us. Not much is expected of us, right? It's not quantity. It's like maybe like small quality. I mean, the amount of Torah scholarship today compared to the past is, absolutely there's a more general knowledge among the population for sure. And even with the war, the war set us back a long time, right? The Shoah set us back. Sure. Yeah, right?
The footsteps kind of imply that it's going to be a really bad generation.
Why? You mean the extra expression, footsteps of Mashiach?
No, all of them. Like,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Or, according to Rav Desla, it's actually going to be a protected generation. We're being inoculated. So we're
what,
dealing with
it's
stuff
not
in
gonna
society.
happen?
We're dealing with stuff in, well, again, this isn't, these aren't predictions per se. They're kind of like, this is what you can expect from a society before Mashiach comes. This is what Mashiach is going to be. So this is what's going to lead. This is going to be the darkness that leads to appreciate the light.
So either we could stay in that cycle and Mashiach will bring us out, or we can come
Yeah,
out of the cycle.
I think that just like in Mitzrayim, right? You could either be really, really bad, you're about to it, and the redemption will be of a very mundane nature, right? Like a poor person riding on a donkey, Oni Ruchav al Chamor, or like a Kaveh, it's going to be an amazing generation and merit it, and that's going to be miraculous. Those are the two possible versions from Daniel or Zechariah. Yeah.
I think Rob Salvation say that like being lonely helps you like find God and like society when you're like there's two.
Oh, he says that the lonely man of faith. He
But
says,
isn't that like
introspection. Why? Why do you want to connect that? It's
It's like,
interesting.
it's like the breakdown of society, and like you're not going to trust anyone. So
Ah.
you're like alone with yourself. You may find.
Aha, that's very interesting. I never thought of it like that. Yeah. That says a lot about him as well. But you can't be totally alone, because Bein Adam Lachaver Mitzvot are what is going to bring Mashiach. We already discussed that. It's a major part.
Yeah, but that
You can't just sit in a mountain, in a cave, meditating, but you've got to be involved with other people. Not just their physical well-being, also their spiritual well-being. That's why the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who wrote extensively about Mashiach and bring Mashiach, and made that into his life mission, right? That's all. He was very big into getting mitzvah out there. We have to spiritually. He saw the problems from Mashiach coming not as physical problems, which for the most part, thank God, is not the case, right? But more spiritual challenge and danger that we need to rescue our brothers and sisters from. Yeah.
No, I just have a more general question. When Mashiach comes, is it like it's for the non-Jews too?
Absolutely. Yeah. We already said that. The Prophet Isaiah says a number of places. Like L'kol ha'amim, for every single person, every nation. The Jews are going to be gathered together to Israel, and all the nations are going to stream to Yerushalayim, to Har Habayit, to hear HaKadosh Baruch, the God of Jacob. Right? And look at Yaakov, he's going to give, no, it's the entire world. 1,000%. Every Jew is going to benefit from that redemption. Yeah? Are we good? That's pre. Let's move to post. And let's look at a Rambam on page 74. So when Mashiach comes, so this is basically what we're going with. It's going to be a time of peace and prosperity. That's what we have to look forward to. We'll finish with this. Now, the Rambam is a little unique in this, in that he says the main difference before and after Mashiach comes is peace. Peace. V'hato'elet hagadol, the great benefit, says the Rambam, asher tiyeh ba'ot ha'amim, that's going to happen in those days. Who? Shenanuach mishubel malchiot. I would highlight those words of the Rambam, very famous words. He says, you know what's going to happen? I mean, others disagree. The Ramban and others say no. It's going to be a miraculous generation, and everything's going to change. But the Rambam is, everything's going to be the same. Olam kamina ga'olech, the world's going to carry on as is, but we are no longer going to be subjugated by other nations who want to hurt us, kill us. No more bombs, no more war. They're going to leave us alone. Shahu, and that is Moneh otanu me'asiyot mitzvah kula. Because in the end, it's because of Galut and these nations that we're not able to do mitzvot, that we're not connected to our heritage. So that's gone. That's what's really prevented us. And as the Prophet Isaiah says, chapter 11, verse 9, the world will be filled with knowledge of God as the water covers the seabed. That's not just for the Jewish people, that's the entire world. There's going to be no more atheism. Okay? Now, that's good for everyone, because the Rambam continues, based upon the prophets, the Yishbatu Milchamot, no more war. No more. I want to think about that for a second. Let's just in your mind, imagine a world where there is no more. Forget the loss of life. Sorry to make it this trivial. Just think about the money that's spent on war every year throughout the entire world. I mean, imagine there's no more. That means you knew for sure no one's going to try to hurt you physically or in any way, right? Or in our generation, online, right? Technological attacks. Imagine that was removed. How much extra money would we have? Could you solve most of the world's problems if you were able to divert every military budget in the entire world to helping humanity? I mean, that would be trillions of dollars. I mean, how much does America spend? I mean, how much of our budget is purely on military stuff to protect, which is good because God knows we need it. gone. All war is gone. Even the threat of war is gone. Right? And he quotes the very famous quote from Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 4. Interestingly, the book of Isaiah is not chronological. Isaiah begins the book like this. V'chitvu chavotam leitim v'chagoteihem lemizmarot. We're going to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. According to some people, this is literal. And all the quotes, the Rambam disagrees and says that these are metaphors to describe the lack of threat that's going to exist in the world. Right? And of course, most famously, nation will not lift up a sword against other nation, and they will not, and they shall learn war no more. Okay? And he says, Vayanim Sabemahem. That's why in those days, Shleimut Rav Niska Balachem Haba. That is the prerequisite for the beginning of Olam Haba. So Mashiach is going to begin the life in the world to come. That's the Rambam. Okay? So there's a pattern. It's extreme darkness, but where's the light? That is this. This is the Boker the Vilna Gaon's talking about. This is the birth of life, of new beginning that will come with Mashiach's arrival. Okay? And he goes on to say, which we've done before, right? Amnam Yimata Mashiach Uzman Shetashuv Malchut Yisrael, and for the Jewish people, that's the entire world. But for the Jewish people, Yechzul Eretz, we're going to return to Eretz Yisrael. Yotam Melech Gadol, he's going to become extremely famous. Obeit Malchato B'Tzion, he's going to be in Zion in Yerushalayim. Yagdel Shemo, become extremely famous. His name will become very, very famous. V'Zichia Maleh Goyim Yotam Melech Shlomo Melech, more famous than Shlomo Melech before him. Yeshlimu Oto Kol Umot, and people are going to make peace with him and travel from other countries because of the tremendous wonders that are going to be done by him. And anyone who arises to attack him, which will happen. I gave a talk last night on the Jewish view of war, right? Or the art of a Jewish war. And people are like, well, war's a bad. Well, war isn't always a bad thing. Mashiach's going to have to do wars, right? Wars are necessary, well, not even necessary evils. They may not pleasant, but they're good. Mashiach may well have to fight actual wars, as well as spiritual, physical ones. Okay? And there's people who are going to stand against him. The most famous one, of course, is Amalek. Amalek is going to stand against Mashiach. Actually, the real job of Mashiach, when push comes to shove, literally, is the removal of Amalek from this world. We know that Kadosh Baruch Hu's Kises is the Torah, is not Shalem, right? Kiseyah is not Shalem until Amalek is uprooted totally from this world. And as a side point, Amalek represents atheism, among other things. That's really, they are the first archetypal atheists. That's what they represent. We don't know who they are nowadays. Mashiach's going to have to figure that one out. For sure. Yeah? So there are people going to stand up against him. Amalek will, just like Amalek went against Moshe Rabbeinu, the Jewish people in the desert, went against Shaul, Hamelech, went up against David, Hamelech, and Mashiach, Hamelech, is also going to have to deal with Amalek. Big time. Big time. And don't think they're just kind of thugs. It could be extremely advanced nation and individuals. Nowadays, it's probably not an actual nation, it's individuals within other nations who maybe will band together in some way. Yeah.
I missed a little part of what you said. You said that something about getting rid of Amalek.
Amalek.
At the end. I don't know.
Yeah, part of Mashiach's job is to uproot Amalek from this world.
And that's just Mashiach's job, or is that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if him personally, but he's going to orchestrate that. We cannot enter Olam Haba with Amalek in this world. They have to be removed. It's just the way it is. Right? Just the way it is. Shaul failed and actually lost kingship. Right, didn't he? It got transferred to David HaMelech because he refused to totally wipe out Agag when he was told to do it. and destroy all their animals. Remember the whole story with Shaul, and because of that, kingship moved from Shevet Binyamin to Shevet Yehuda. So the Amalek piece is a big one. Okay. The Rambam says, and again, the Rambam is, I wouldn't say unique, but not everyone agrees with this piece of Rambam, right? Meaning the other, Rishonim. He says, Al Yale Alev, page 74. Don't presume that in the Messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change. Okay? Al Yale Alev, Shivat Mashiach, Yevatel Davar Min Hagosh Olam. Or Yesham Chidush, some kind of crazy change in society. Ella Olam Min Hago Noheg. The world is going to carry on as is. That's the Rambam. Again, Kabbalists disagree, but that's what he says. And he said, 1 second, don't we know from the prophet Isaiah chapter 11 verse 6 that the wolf, the Ze'ev im Keves, is going to live with the lamb, and the leopard, the Namar im Gedi, with the goat? I know that's not normal, is it? They're usually eating each other. So the Rambam says these are meshalim. All of these expressions are purely metaphorical and not to be taken literally. They refer to nations that are like wolves, and nations that are like lambs, and nations that are like leopards and goats. And when the prophet Isaiah and others use such expressions, they are merely talking about how we're not going to be attacked, and no nation is going to have physical control of another one, right? All of these nations are going to return to the true faith and no longer steal or destroy, and they will leave the Jewish people alone. The lion will eat straw. So according to him, these are all nimshalim. Similarly, he says, V'chein, says the Rambam in Hilchah Malachim, all of these expressions, whenever you see prophecies that give unnatural phenomena, are merely there as metaphors for you to learn out something from. Okay? They're just illusions. Hayat mashal uma inyan ramaz bahen. You got to figure out, or we'll see exactly what the final reality is. Okay? That's the Rambam on all of the mashalim in the prophets. Okay. Very good. We'll stop over there.